Okay, just finishing up the last 2 pages of the cell respiration notes. Taking a look, this is very similar to what I had on the board, kind of repetitive, but let's just go through it. So you have to fill in aerobic cell respiration here, anaerobic cell respiration. Sometimes we refer to that as fermentation here. Okay, there's a couple things here I want to add or change. I don't like this diagram. So cellular respiration, it starts with organic compounds, but it's glucose is the organic molecule that we start with, okay? And I think I told you that all the other molecules you eat in your food can be turned into glucose, but glucose is what I want you to know. And it's going to go through glycolysis, which remember we called stage 1. And you're going to end up with 2. Pyruvic acid is the same thing as pyruvate, as far as you're concerned. There's a difference in like the pH it'll pick up or ionize at an H+, but don't, pyruvic acid is not the word that we will use. But so you end up with, you have 1 glucose, you do glycolysis, you get 2 pyruvates, and you get 2 ATP, just to keep with my ATP in orange. And we get the same thing over here. So glycolysis is the same in both. We get 2 pyruvate, right, this is phase 1. The organic compound we start with is glucose. So anaerobic or fermentation, anaerobic and aerobic respiration both start with the same process, glycolysis. Exactly the same. What's going to change then is those 2 pyruvates, then what do we do from there? So this part is the different part for you to fill in the word different. But the 2 pyruvates are going to get turned into, let's add some more detail here. Okay, we're going to get 6 carbon dioxides and 6 waters, and we're going to get 34 ATPs, and that's going to be, that's kind of combining, remember phase 2 is the Krebs cycle, and phase 3 is the electron transport chain. It's kind of putting those all together. So here's phase 1, glycolysis, right? Remember Krebs cycle, you get 2 ATPs. The electron transport chain, you get 32 ATPs. So the grand total here, remember, is 36 ATPs total from aerobic respiration. So the 34 isn't really a number to memorize because it's just memorize that Krebs cycle gives you 2, electron transport chain gives you 32, and glycolysis gives you 2. So we get a total of 36 ATPs from aerobic. If oxygen is, remember this is if oxygen is present. This is with oxygen. That's what aerobic means. Anaerobic means without oxygen. Okay, so over here, going back, let's look at the anaerobic pathways. This is the second part's what we call fermentation. So we do glycolysis, then fermentation, and we either get 2 lactic acids or we get 2 ethanol and 2 carbon dioxides. I don't know what that is. Okay. Those are the 2 types of anaerobic. And there's no more ATP here. So you get 2 ATPs in glycolysis. This last part, fermentation, doesn't give you any more ATP. So you still get a total of 2 ATPs from anaerobic. Just another, kind of like what I had on the board, just kind of an overview of comparing both, okay? So this is just a picture talking about just fermentation, or, you know, fermentation, anaerobic are the same, kind of refer to them synonymously. So it's showing you again, you start out with 1 glucose, make that into 2 pyruvates, which is glycolysis, and then these are the 2 different fermentations. So this is showing you, right, this is showing you lactic acid fermentation, and then these in green, this is alcohol fermentation and how we use them. And we talked about all this in the notes. It's just kind of giving you a picture, right? We said yeast. You don't need to know the fancy word for yeast, but just know yeast, which we said is a unicellular organism, is what we use. It's the living thing that will do alcohol fermentation when there's no oxygen, and it'll make the ethanol is what gives us the alcohol in beer, wine, and then this is the carbon dioxide gives you the alcohol burns off, we talked about, and the little air pockets are CO2, what makes bread rise. We talked about yogurt and cheese. As you know, again, you don't need to know the species of bacteria that does this or that. There's another species of bacteria. Lactic acid's also how we make soy sauce. I don't think we quiz you on that, but maybe just know that. And then lastly, we're just kind of going back to comparing respiration and photosynthesis. Okay, there's the equations again. Remember, they're backwards of each other. And then there's a chart there. Let me just switch over to the notes. It's easier to write it in. Okay, kind of comparing. So this quiz is mostly about respiration, aerobic and anaerobic, but it wants you to be able to compare respiration to photosynthesis. So most of this comparison, we're comparing aerobic, because that's the more highly evolved respiration, to photosynthesis. So the function of photosynthesis, right, it makes glucose, which is a sugar, to use for energy. So sometimes you'll see we're saying that photosynthesis is storing energy, but not really we're kind of storing it. We're making glucose, the sugar, the food that it's going to use for energy. And aerobic, sometimes they refer to this as releasing energy, because we're breaking down glucose or sugar to release energy to make ATP. So this kind of like, we're storing energy because we're making glucose. Here we're releasing energy because we're breaking down glucose. They're kind of opposites. Location, chloroplast, and aerobic respiration mostly happens in the mitochondria. But remember, phase 1, glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm. Phase 2, the Krebs cycle, and phase 3, the electron transport chain, happen in the mitochondria. The reactants here are 6 carbon dioxide, 6 waters, and the products are glucose. Do you guys know that's glucose by now? And 6 oxygens. You can see this back here if you just look at the equation. The reactants of aerobic cell respiration are glucose. It's the opposite. And 6 oxygen. So remember, the reactants of one are the products of the other, if you just want to memorize respiration or photosynthesis, the other's backwards. And remember the phases of photosynthesis, just to refresh your memory. 1 was the light-dependent reactions. And 2 was the light-independent reactions. Otherwise known as the Calvin cycle. There were 3 phases here. Glycolysis, Krebs cycle, don't get that confused with the Calvin cycle, and electron transport chain. Which we abbreviate ETC. So that kind of gives you an overview of the two, aerobic respiration versus photosynthesis. Okay, that's it.